something as personalized addiction treatment. And so, as I told, this all slides can be reproduced by any of you without any hesitation. Only thing, make sure that do acknowledge our name when you producing the slides. And nothing to disclose. Now, starting the slides is what is a personalized addiction treatment, pharmacogenomics, targets in addiction developments and conclusion. Right side you can see a commentary which is published by David Osley, who is the pioneer of addiction treatment. Personalized addiction treatment, how close are we? So the last line tells you how close are we. After the end of the discussion, probably will know whether at least some closeness has come or is still very far. Right. Now, this is the paradox of modern drug development. All of us know. We follow a principle where the drugs being told effective in a general population by RCTs, and you claim that this drug is very effective and use it. But in the real practice, we see the patients which are completely different from the your trial. Today's case by Dr. Saurabh is a example how so many things can happen in a patient, and these are the patients who will never go to a clinical trial. They will always be excluded from the clinical trials. So our patients in the real practice varies in the treatment, response, side effect, and effectiveness. So why it is so? All of us know one size does not fit. So all of us, so antidepressant you get only 38% people are it doesn't work. And anti-asthma drug 40% people does not show response, and it goes to other drugs also where a wide variability of responses by the people who take the drugs. In this context, there is a lot of talk about personalized medicine or PM. This is a medical model that proposes the customization of healthcare with medical decision, practice, and products being tailored to the individual patients. There are different names: personalized medicine, targeted treatment, and multiple names are there. If you look at this, looks like, if you simplify it, this is how it is. Yeah, you have a clinical profile, phenotype or clinical profile, which is a medicine part here. If you see the right side one, this is medicine which you all learn in our medical practice, seeing the symptom, putting the symptom in a constellation, diagnosing it, and there's a treatment for that. That all of us do it. Now also we do know about something about genomics. At this point of time, with the rapid development happening, genomics are easily doable. Now, and you know about pharmacogenomics, that is how the drug modify the medical action. So keeping these three things, it's extremely sorry, our internet went off now. So is it audible now? Is it okay? Yeah, sorry. And this shows our internet connectivity in current India, where we have a NIC connectivity of high band, but still it goes off in between. Can help. So why we need a personal medicines? Because there's a biological variation of drug response. ADHD medicines only works for 1 of 10 toddlers, and cancer drugs are effective only 25% of patients, and depression drug work with only 6 to 10% patients. And in addiction, it's very interesting. Naltrexone acamprosate work 1 out of 8 addiction patients you prescribe. So your number needed to treat is 8. So you give 8% and hoping that 1% respond, and then you claim that this drug is very effective. So this is where you are stuck now. One of the promising area in this is, I'll briefly talk about oncogenomics, which actually has revolutionized the personal medication trend. Tumor heterogeneity linked with drug therapy. This drug, trastuzumab, somebody can spell better than me, used in breast cancer, is a monoclonal antibody drug that interferes with HER2, a new receptor. This is effective in patients with cancer if there is overexpression of this receptor, and this can be detected by in situ hybridization technique. So you can actually target those who are positive of this receptor. They can get the benefit of this drug. Similarly, patients with melanoma, leukemia, and metastatic lung and breast cancers are now routinely offered a molecular diagnosis. You must have come across big advertisement in newspaper where it is offered to the people, and because it's effective at this point of time. Come to addiction. very interesting thing. Now, first of all, addiction is too heterogeneous and complex. That your treatment varies from everywhere. It's a psychosocial intervention, providing employment, housing, to cognitively based therapy, to your peer like Alcohol Anonymous, to the spirituality and pharmacological approach. And there is so many approaches. The reason being we don't know whom to give what, and that's why we all try to give everything to everybody and thinking that something will stick to somebody. So in addiction treatment, this quote from the article, the goal of personalized approach to treatment planning is to maximize outcomes in the treatment of each individual and not just offer one standard treatment or treatments. Then for this purpose, you need to break down the addiction cycle and understand what is the probably biology behind addiction. The first part, obviously, the drug response. How is drug works? The way alcohol works, the way opioid work. Each drug has a different way to work in your brain. Craving, all of us know, has a neurobiological basis. Emotion or mood or affective symptoms does regulate our substance intake. Executive control, all of us being aware that executive control inhibits or is not working, then it predisposes a person for addiction and drive to take things. Which component is predominant, and to have a backup biomarkers, probably a target for treatment in this condition. Coming to biomarkers, we have probably three broadly: genetics, neuroimaging, that's PET, and physiological biomarker. Now, for the time's sake, I will focus on this genetics, and probably this is the area where maximum work has happened. Neuroimaging and all are still in the investigating stage for the understanding addiction. Not on the pharmacoimagings are very not yet proven. Few physiological parameters like EEG or affinity to sweet test have been talked about, but again, I don't think there is an implication in treatment part has been spoken. So we will focus on the pharmacogenomics. There is a treatment part. Now, pharmacogenomics gives the idea about in-depth look at the genetic structure, easy to be disseminated, low cost. You may or may not believe, but the cost is rapidly actually falling down. And if you look at the cost when the HapMap project was started, and at this point in time, it's tremendously less. I mean, and also at the end, it reduces the likelihood of unnecessary treatment, effectiveness and adverse effect taken together. These few slides, you can just see right drug, right gene, and you get individual medicine. This is something I thought is helpful. DNA sequence of all human beings are 99% identical. So all of us are identical. Probably, we only differ by 0.1%. So does it make difference? If only 0.1%, yes, it makes difference. This percent translates into 3 million separate spelling differences in a genome of 3 billion bases. So always 0.1 difference, that is good enough to show how people respond to different type of genetic changes. So what is genetic polymorphism? A genetic polymorphism is any mutant or variant gene that occurs with the frequency of more than 1% in normal population. I just briefly speak about this thing just to rehearse our own knowledge, which obviously for the SNP, that this sense SNP is single nucleotide polymorphism, this sense nonsense, and there are multiple terms are there. Okay, now let's give example here. This is a single nucleotide polymorphism, and the most common incidence 1 per 300 600 pp base pair. So this is a 10th chromosome in the long arm. You can see the long arm chromosome in the cytochrome P2C9 gene. This is the architecture. Now here you get a normal activity when there is a GC combination. C stays in the 4th place. So you get. Now replace C with T. What do you get? You get enzyme which decreases activity, and all of us know the cytochromal enzymes are so essential to produce an effect or side effect of the different medications. So replacing C with T, you get a active enzyme to decrease enzyme activity. Similarly, this is regarding a here a DNA leads to transcription, gets a protein, and the translation produces an amino acid sequence. So in a normal missense mutation, the C is the top can be replaced by T. Then you can see your amino acid sequence being deranged and stop in between. So it obviously produces a different thing. Similarly, this is an example of nonsense mutation. Again, you can hear the change of the third one, fourth one, that is into A and U, then you get a different type of protein. Similarly, this is also a frame shift mutation where you take out one A out of 3A, take out one A, and you get a different type of combinations. So deletion, I think, is self-explanatory. Duplication, get more. So now, what happens by this? Now, because of this all polymorphism, your drug metabolism get affected, transportation get affected, sensitivity of the receptors, be it a GABA or glutamate or opioid, responder, non-responder, adverse drug reaction, and disease susceptibility. So all your sequence get completely affected if there is a single polymorphism anywhere in your. Now, in a say little small in targets and addiction are variable. Genes are likely to operate through their influence, either direct or indirect, on brain development, relevant neurotransmitter system, drug metabolic pathway, neural circuitry, cellular physiology, behavioral patterns, and response to stimuli and personality trait. The reason I want to show this one, so there is a lot of variability. To find a single genetic marker to respond is really impossible. So coming to the current development which has happened in this area, leading towards at least in the middle way, start with alcohol, and one of the well tested thing is OPRM, that is opioid mu receptor 1. So mu opioid receptor, as you know, is involved in craving and reward of almost all the substances. Now in this OPRM1, that is your mu opioid receptor, if there is a replacement of normal amino acid at the 40, where asparagine is replaced by aspartic acid, then you get something like ASP40 variant. So those who are carriers of asparagine 40 variants likely to respond better to treatment than aspartic acid. I think I did mistake. Those who are aspartic acid 40 variants are likely to do better than compared to the asparagine 40 variant. So here you are replacing asparagine by aspartate. So this SNP, also known as A118G or in different names, 87% of subjects who had 1 or 2 copies of ASP40 allele had a positive outcome to naltrexone treatment, compared to 49% response among those who are homozygous. This is actually a retrospective finding of a study, combined study, where what they did, they compared the naltrexone and acamprosate for the responders, and from the responders who are on naltrexone, they have taken and did the genetic analysis, and this is the finding they got it. The finding is that those who have copies of ASP40 are likely to respond better compared to those who have ASM40. So response rate among subject homozygous to ASM40 is equal to placebo. So again, it means somebody having ASP40 likely to respond better, somebody ASM40 not likely to respond better to naltrexone. Again, it's specific to naltrexone because it's opioid antagonist. So if I summarize it, the carriers of A118G opioid mu receptor, that is ASP40 polymorphism, has a better clinical response to naltrexone. Now there is a caveat. One study didn't find it positive also. Now why the caveat? So this is also a supplementary finding. Now the African people has very low allele frequency for ASP40. So if they have very low allele frequency in the general population itself, if you give an naltrexone, it's not going to work with them. So this is a finding. I'll get back. But I got a very interesting study. I thought from Indian population, and this study is done in Calcutta. And the sample was collected from a private center, was Bowal I think I'm not ever Bowal and National Medical College, Calcutta. The predominant caste in that sample was Kayasthan Brahmin. They have a DSM-4 diagnosis of dependence, and is done in the Institute of Cellular Molecular Biology in Calcutta. But a very interesting finding. I know we are lucky. So you have more ASP40 allele in the population. So means if we get addicted, we are more likely to respond to opioid antagonist. And first finding they got is that greater prevalence of ASP40 allele in general Indian population, both control as well as addiction. But also they found there is significant association between A118G, both alcohol and opioid addicts, compared to normal population. Below I have mentioned the odds ratio. if somebody has AG, that is A118G, the odds of getting alcohol addiction is, opioid addiction is 2.44 and alcohol addiction is 2.67. You can see the round marks. One is the AA. Again, the point, if you have more ASP40, you have more opioid related craving. So then your opioid receptor is predominantly working as a neurobiology of craving. So chances that you respond to naltrexone is much higher because naltrexone is a pure opioid antagonist. So at least you know that in this group, at least you have some idea. These are the people who has a primary OPRM1 positive related craving or relapse, whatever you want to give the name. And then this article also quote about in the people who as per the areas of the country world, UK Caucasian has 0.152 polymorphism. So Chinese and Japanese is more. So probably naltrexone work better than them. I don't know. But see, look at African American, 0. So a person who is addicted to alcohol, having African American origin, chance of giving a response to naltrexone will be, by this study, will be 0. But we need to wait for the study to come. But this is how the finding is. So we are better than Chinese and better than Caucasian, UK Caucasian and Swedish. Our population has more G allele of A1 and 8G. The chance of probably response is better. Again, addiction is more and response is more. So now look at this. This again from Wikipedia. A is normal. AG, strong craving for alcohol, and response to treatment is successful. Okay. So this is the hypothesis they taken. So you have more expression of this OPRM1. So response will be more better. The next one is a GABA one, where initial work is coming up now. P allele of a GABA receptor subunit alpha 6 polymorphism has been associated with greater naltrexone efficacy, whereas C allele predict improvement with acamprosate. At least some hint at whom to give naltrexone and whom to give acamprosate. If you combine the both studies, it may lead to you give us hint. Nicotine smoking, there's very encouraging result. This is from the metabolism side, because cytochrome metabolism is actually genetically more studied than the other ones. So here they're talking that if you're using a transdermal, a skin patch of replacement therapy, tobacco patch, those who have less active CYP2S6, that is slow metabolizers, found to have increased nicotine level in the blood. And that's why they need fewer dose of NRT and better outcome. So if you are metabolizing the nicotine slowly, you are getting more nicotine in the body. You need not to take always inhaler or sprayer, and the response to treatment is better than who is a rapid metabolizers. Whereas rapid metabolism of nicotine had higher quit rates when treated with bupropion than the placebo. So if you are giving bupropion, hope that he is rapid metabolizer. But you're giving NRT, hope that is slow metabolizer. So if you have a kit and cytochrome kits are available, and you do a let's say saliva testing, then you find out that decide the treatment accordingly, which is will be interesting. Carriers of MET genotype of COMT gene had higher rate of prolonged abstinence with NRT than carriers of the MET-BAL or BAL-BAL groups. Again, there are interest studies. This is last part of the presentation. There are non-specific targets like N-acetylcysteine. This targets this cytosine glutamate exchanger and helps restore the glutamate homeostasis. It's general; it's not genetically linked. It's just a neuromodulator role. N-acetylcysteine showing positive results in cocaine and nicotine addiction also. Another target recently is glutamate modulators. As more and more understanding is happening, they are finding the glutamate is the main culprit in the brain, and if you have a glutamate modulators, the chances of improvement is higher. This is an interesting, area which has again stopped but restarted interest in this area. Having a vaccine. Now, the objective here, you give a vaccine, develop his antibodies against the substance. So, when the person takes the substance, the antigen will combine with the antibody and prevent those substances to go into the brain. You don't want the substance from the blood to go to the brain. So you develop adequate antibodies to protect that to go to the brain. Now this is a till phase 3 it went, Nic-Vax vaccine, where smoker who can generate a high titer of anti-nicotine antibodies were 3 times more likely to achieve a sustained abstinence compared to those immunized with placebo. So basically what you do here, you generate the antibodies against nicotine by vaccine, let him smoke or take nicotine, those nicotine goes to blood, trap an antibody with the antigen antibody reaction, then that complex doesn't go to the pure nicotine doesn't go to the brain, chance of recovery is better. Now challenge is this, how you will ensure the significant increase in the antibody the person happens, can you count it? So basically it means how you can ensure the antigenicity of the vaccine. So it had, in 2011 also study has come, probably things might work later, but this is a challenge here. This is an interesting part also, where cocaine is metabolized by a chemical known as butyrylcholinesterase. Here your objective is to genetically make butyrylcholinesterase much faster, or you should work 1,000-fold higher. So the moment people take cocaine, it metabolizes to an inactive compound. So then you don't have active cocaine. And there's a latest study in 2012 where they found that the genetically modified butyrylcholinesterase can work 1,000-fold higher. So this is, I think, my part. I'll finish the last slide. As I told at the beginning, this is a very evolving and promising area. At least OPRM1, where you had some hint to do what, and nicotine 1 is a cytochrome. I have not spoken about the other vulnerability factors like EEG or P300, preference to the sweet, as the first case told. There is a lot of literature coming out, preference to the sweet, which is regulated by the leptin and ghrelin. The gastrohormones are linked to the addiction, and these are all spectrum. I didn't speak about the literature coming out. I didn't speak about hormones, the cortisol and all, but this definitely combining all these things will take an area of endophenotype. And I'll stop here and open for discussion.
Thank you, sir, for this very informative and excellent presentation. And this has been a very complicated area, the area of genetics and molecular biology. But sir has taken efforts to simplify it to a large extent. Now I would invite residents and students and other listeners to ask questions, clarify many of the complicated issues, particularly because we have Madam who is a Dr. Meera Purushottam, who is an expert in the field of genetics in addiction and substance use disorders. She can help us to clarify many of the intricate complexities of this genetics and biomarkers in relation to addiction.
Yeah, any questions you want to ask? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Karishma. I have a question regarding the vaccine that you spoke of. In case of intravenous drugs of abuse, if the same, does the body normally produce antibodies against these kinds of antibodies?
Yeah, the question was when somebody uses intravenous use, normally body produces or not. And one extent, taking further extension, that opium, they actually produce antibody, and when people actually use IDU, they didn't get the effect. So something happened, but whether that has happened or not, I don't know. But artificial, they have produced the opioid antibodies for the IVD drug users. So theoretically, yes, possible.
Actually, the producing the antibodies, it depends upon the antigenicity. Often, what they have done to increase the efficacy of the vaccine, they have tagged with a molecule, with a product, high molecule or thing like that, which can elicit more antigenicity. So sometimes that, particularly the initial nicotine vaccines, they failed because they were not tagged with a molecule with more antigenicity. Later, they have tried to devise this. So the thing, it depends upon the many of these technological issues, that how to elicit more antigenicity.
This question, I think I can ask Madam to respond. So the question is, at present, this all pharmacogenomic information, can it help us in treatment?
Probably, doctor.
Yes.
Yeah. So, like Dr. Prabhat mentioned, there are many recent studies where people have looked at various polymorphisms as possible loci which can help us to predict whether a certain person is going to respond to a certain treatment or not. So, in cases where it is like the examples that Dr. Prabhat mentioned, like the opioid receptor polymorphism, it should not be a very difficult experiment for a small lab to carry out. So, just like you have genetic diagnostic facilities, now many of these facilities do provide on call, like if you give them the blood sample, they will tell you what is the allele that a person has. So if you are not able to do it yourself in house in your clinic, you should be able to get the help of these diagnostic laboratories, because I'm told that they do it in many places. And yeah, because it is quite a simple experiment. If you don't require a whole lot of blood, just a few drops of blood actually is enough for you to do this experiment. And I'm sure that as it gets more popular, people will come up with kits which people can even kind of try to do it on their own.
Also, I have a thing that in case let's we want to know the OPRM1 AG.
Yes.
What do you tell the what do you order, or what do you tell the
Yeah, so the experiment designed for every particular polymorphism varies a little bit depending on the DNA sequence. So one usually has to design an experiment which can differentiate between, in this case, for example, whether you have an A allele or a G allele. Now, I'm not familiar with this particular case, but usually you take the help of restriction endonucleases, which are sequence-specific enzymes. So what one would do is that you would first isolate DNA, either from the buccal mucosa or the blood of the patient. And then once you have the DNA, you design the, sorry. So, so you would, sorry. Yeah, so you design primers for that particular locus, and once you have adequate quantity of DNA, you try to design an experiment to differentiate between the two alleles. So if you have an enzyme that can differentiate between the two, then afterwards you take the PCR product, digest it with that enzyme, and depending on your result, you can tell whether a person has an A or a G. If that does not happen, the definite way of doing it is to sequence that, but that's a little slightly more expensive experiment.
Right. So, Madam has explained how easily it's doable. It's the reason when I was going through literature, I could understand with my limited knowledge is that definitely it's become more doable, and as Dr. Pfizer has mentioned that it is going to open a new horizons for therapy. I mean, last 4 or 5 years, each time I study about OPRM1 and a few of those I feel more and more things are coming up. Again, in looking at these different studies, definitely it gives idea to how expensive. Dr. Saranya's question: how expensive at present? Any test you can.
Yeah, so probably at the cheapest it may be say 200-300 rupees. At the most expensive, it may be a few thousand rupees.
That is nothing expensive.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so nice to hear.
So it is that see, the thing with all of these polymorphisms is how much you're going to use it. If you have like something like the OPRM, which will work for many different things, or your cytochrome P450 variants, if you are able to do that genotyping, you can use that for many different drugs. It's not going to be only for one thing. So once you set it up, because the cost of getting a primers is a one-time investment. Once you have it, you can do thousands of samples. So the only thing, the recurring cost is going to be your PCR chemicals, and at first you will of course have to have the basic minimum centrifuge and refrigerator and those which any biochemistry lab would have. Additional thing would be a PCR machine and a small electrophoresis setup if you want to do it in the most simplest way.
Yeah, I think I mean, the point that Meera was mentioning is that, like other testing we do nowadays, but this is doable. Obviously, you have to have um, um, the multiple uses for the same thing. It's easier and cost effective. Yeah. Dr. Saurabh, point is,
Dr. Saurabh asking that has suggested that the challenge is to develop a protocol for what tests to do for what abuse drug medication combination.
yeah.
Yes, Dr. Saurabh, it is really a challenge because still though one of the SNPs we are knowing, but there are many other factors and many other SNPs is influencing in substance abuse, particularly in pragmatic or practice. We do not get a one substance abuse, polysubstance abuse with different and other issues, medical issues. So it is really challenging. But for the individual case, or for a few selected cases, this can be a very good approach to identify the molecular basis and then treat accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, one of the approach, as it's been told, it's obviously it's a personalized approach. So here your objective is very clear. You are giving a treatment to a person, knowing his genomics, and obviously you have idea that which drugs work where. And now, if person is addicted, let's see, those Indian study I showed where they've taken both alcohol and opiate, both groups, and there they found the polymorphism in the OPRM1 is very predominant. So now whether the person is single alcohol dependence or combined opioid dependence, the major manifestation is through the OPRM1 gene. So I mean, in the genetic wise, it doesn't distinguish the types of drug. So obviously respond. Now the bottom difficulty will be is there any other factors playing a role? Impulsivity, other issues. So as drug addiction is too complex, see one part you can take care of this, but I think at least you can take care of something which you can do sure shot rather than now in a situation where you don't know exactly what is happening. Madam, for you, what about Dr. Faiza's question? What about gene therapy and removal of unhealthy genes? Is this feasible in our country? Dr. Meera can answer. I am not at all a best person for this.
Well, I don't think you even have to say our country. I think right now it's still not available as an alternative anywhere in the world for most. It's very much in its infancy. Though there have been studies where people are able to shut off a gene, let's say in a stem cell or or a pluripotent stem cell and then take it up to the neuron. So the studies have been like you can now, of course, technology has gone to a stage where if you know where your mutation is, you can do an experiment and change that mutation to make it an allele which is not pathogenic anymore. That can be done. And you can do that in a particular cell. So that means you can change whatever you want in the cell, yes. But whether you can put that back in the human being and in your patient and undo the damage which has already been caused, that is still far away. I mean, it is probably can be imagined to be done more in, let's say, in blood disorders, where you can imagine that if you put in bone marrow stem cells, you could slowly overpopulate, the whole lineage of cells. So it has been tried out in those kind of things. And then, for example, in Parkinson's, people have tried to put back neurons. So it is still in very much a trial basis. So we cannot pontificate and say, yes, we've conquered everything and we're just going to, get rid of all genetic disorders. It's still a long way to go, but the technology to make the change, definitely we are making progress with that. So it will take a while still before you can see that.
Hope the day comes early, but in that case, before that, we should know about the approach. What approach we are going to follow in this genetics of these substance use disorders? Like one is the candidate gene approach, one is the genome-wide association studies. In that candidate gene approach, we have been knowing that there are several fallacies. So, is genome-wide association studies will show us the way, or they also have limitations? And what will be the?
No, there are two different things here. One is when you're looking at a case control association study, you were looking at associations of particular candidate genes, particular polymorphisms for, say, addiction or some mental illness. So that is what it is. But here we were, I think, talking about pharmacogenomics. We're trying to address how you're going to treat these disorders. So The only difference is that you're talking about genes which are responsible for either the drug action, or so for example, if you're talking about cytochromes and things like that, you're talking about how soon your the molecule that you're going to treat is going to get degraded. So depending on whether a person has a very active cytochrome or a low active cytochrome, you have to give more of the same drug or less of the same drug. Just like Dr. Prabhat was mentioning that, if you there is the nicotine continues in the system for a longer time or a smaller time, because this cytochrome P family is a whole family of proteins which basically degrades any of these substances. So it doesn't know whether it is going to be something that you have taken to help you, or a drug of abuse. So that's what it is. So when you say omics and all of that, there are all these commercial establishments now who have come up and say that you give me your blood and I'll tell you whether you're going to get this or that. So the thing is that in these brute force approaches, what people do is they sequence your entire genome, but nobody still knows that if you have this variant or that, whether you're going to get diabetes at 20 or 50, nobody knows. I mean, at the end of it, you probably get, a long list of what are your alleles and your risk alleles are. But there is no statistician who can tell you that what is the probability that you're going to get it. Because finally, if you're a patient, even if probability is 0.0001, you can still get it. So what is the utility of these things is very, very, very questionable. But it's like, it's a nice way you can charge somebody 50,000 or a lakh and say, okay, I've given you your entire genome. But what you're going to do with that information is quite something else.
I think we should stop here. I mean, I think this is the area which sometimes we have a complete module. Madam is here, she'll ask, and first team. So we thought about in psychiatric disorders, genomic genetics module on psychiatric disorder. There's a lot of things to learn, and probably I mean, one of the article I was reading how the clinicians are ignorant about genetic development, and they're very seriously thinking to a mandatory genetic course or something for clinicians. Because again, it's a thing we need to all need to, like statistics we will learn.